came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demoniacs met him, coming out of the tombs so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a herd of many swine was feeding at some distance from them, and the demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the swine, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. The herdsmen fled, and going into the city, and told everything and what had happened to the demoniacs. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. I want to cross-reference this with Mark's account where the demoniacs are healed. If you go to the beginning of Mark chapter 5, I'd like to read it because there are a few more details in this passage. So Mark chapter 5 says, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had come out of the boat, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who lived among the tombs. And no one could bind him any more, even with a chain. For he had often been bound with fetters and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the fetters he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and bruising himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, 'What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me.' For he had said to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.' And Jesus asked him, 'What is your name?' He replied, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' And he begged him eagerly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of swine was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, 'Send us into the swine, let us enter them.' So he gave them leave. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down into the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the man who had the legion, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their neighborhood. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you.' And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all men marveled." So we see that Jesus and his disciples, they finally land on dry ground. And the traditional place that Jesus landed was at Kursi. And you could see that from a distance in the very first slide that we had. And it literally means armchair. Armchair, and from its appearance, it looks like a big armchair, if you remember. And there are many cliffs in this area, and so there are a lot of good candidates still today for where this miracle might have taken place. But we see in this passage that there's not just one demoniac. There's not just one man possessed by a demon. There are 2, Matthew will tell us. And of course, Mark is only going to tell us about one of them, and Luke is going to tell us about one of them. So it would imply that one of them is the major spokesperson of the 2. So there were actually 2. And so we've got many rocky caves near Susita and Kursi, that these caves along the hillside, can you see here how easy it would have doubled as a tomb? And so we've got great attestation from various literature and tradition that the tombs along these hills along the Sea of Galilee also doubled as tombs. And so we see that this is where these demoniacs are living. And we know that pagans believed in ancestor worship. They held ancestors as if they were gods. And one way that they would honor their ancestors is that they would bring a meal to their relative's tomb. And they would take it as a meal offering to the tomb. So these demon-possessed men, if they're living among the tombs, the way that they had their sustenance, the way that they ate, was by taking the food that relatives would bring their ancestors, and that's how they would survive among the tombs. We're also told that they cut themselves, which we know was a part back then and still today of pagan rituals, cutting yourselves. Remember the worshipers there on Mount Carmel when they were trying to get Baal's attention. Aren't you glad we don't have to resort to such things to get God's attention? All we have to do is cry out, and he hears us. He knows our heart. But Matthew will tell us that these men were so violent that no one could pass through and no one could keep them bound. Yet they approach Jesus, and even they know that Jesus is the Son of God. Many times when a demon comes in contact with Jesus, they will cry out and say, "You are the Son of the Most High God." And even James 2:19, will tell us that even the demons believe, and they shudder at the thought. We see here that Jesus is going to ask this demon their name, and this is the only time, if you look at all of the times throughout the New Testament where Jesus and a demon have contact, this is the only time that he actually asks the demon their name, and we see that his name is Legion. And we could literally say, maybe your translation has mob or army, and although a Roman legion is 4,000 to 6,000, we should interpret this here as an indefinite number. It's a mob of demons that are possessing these men. And we know from archaeology that Gentiles, pagans, raised swine in this very area, and you can click through to the next slide, but they raised pigs in this area, both to eat. Of course, Jewish people don't eat pigs, but Gentiles certainly do, but they raised these swine to eat, and also a swine was, they were religious sacred animals. So they had connotations in various pagan cults as a sacred animal to worship. And so these demons asked to be sent into the swine, into the herd of pigs. And so we see from other sources, from other ancient literature, that there were times where demons would beg someone who was trying to exorcise them to be transferred to various places. And a common belief in Jesus' day was that demons lived in the sea. And so Jesus casts out these demons into the swine, and they rush off the steep banks of the cliffs into the lake. And it's a very strange story because this miracle, plus the miracle, remember when Jesus comes along and he rebukes the fig tree and it withers? Those are the only two miracles that Jesus performs that have a destructive quality to them. All the other miracles that Jesus performs, there's life being given or something is being raised. So it's kind of odd that there would be this loss of life, but the locals put their focus more on those swine than they did the man or the two men that had been healed. And that's what we should focus on, that these men were set free. We shouldn't care about the swine so much as we care about the men. And the villagers would have appeared to have cared more about their income and the herds of swine and maybe their religious practice than the two men that were once bound that were now made whole. And so they were afraid and they begged Jesus to leave their area. But there's a great lesson for us to learn. We should always be more concerned about people and what God has done for them than all of the peripheral things that surround. If only they could have seen with Jesus' eyes. Remember that the account we just read in Mark includes the fact that at least one of these men wanted to follow Jesus back to the other side of the lake where he had come from, where we showed you earlier. They wanted to follow Jesus back, away from their home, away from what was familiar to him. But in this case, Jesus did not allow this man to follow him. Jesus wanted him to stay and be a witness right where he was. Now, remember those who wanted to follow Jesus last week? They desired and they had all of these excuses why they couldn't follow Jesus. Jesus wanted them to follow him. But this man wants to follow Jesus, and yet Jesus tells him, go home and go back to your friends. And so we're told that he began to proclaim in the Decapolis. Decapolis just means 10 cities, and these were great Greco-Roman cities there in the area. But he told him to go and proclaim what God had done. And our text here says everybody was amazed. Everybody. Why were they amazed? Because they had passed this area before and they had seen how these men had lived. And they knew that no ordinary event could have changed their lives. And I think that there's so many lessons for us to learn from this. Sometimes the harvest field is right in front of us. It is right where we are. Should we be concerned with those half a world away? Of course. It is a mandate, wholeheartedly. We should be concerned with the whole world, but we should never be so consumed with the unknown soul that we ignore the people that we know are right in front of us. So these formerly demon-possessed men were sent back home to witness. And church history is going to tell us that, in fact, this area was evangelized, and a great community of believers arose in this very area. Remember, it was a Gentile area, very area where Jesus had sent him. All because Jesus was willing to cross over to the other side to deliver hope to a hopeless outcast, who in turn then became a witness to his known world. Jesus crossed over, he changed a man's life, and then that man used what God had done to witness to his world. And so we could sum up this lesson for the harvest field as expect opposition. Expect opposition, but anticipate deliverance on the other side.